I'm Tammy Ma. Welcome to the Mom of Many podcast. So today's show, we're going to talk about the big picture. And the reason I'm doing that is I realize as we get started on this podcast, it's a good idea to kind of understand the big picture of what we're after in parenting. And so I kind of hope to share with you some of my thoughts behind that. A lot of times I get questions and emails and questions like this. How do I get my child to eat healthy foods? Or how do I get my child to wake up in the morning and get to school on time? How do I get to my teen out the door in the mornings without drama? How do I get my toddler to stay in bed at night? And how do I get my teen to stop abusing the phone and phone privileges? The list goes on and on. I'm sure that you as parents have a ton of similar questions. They're not uncommon to us, are they? So a lot of times we want quick answers. Please tell me the 3 steps to get my 4-year-old to eat spinach, mushrooms, tomatoes, and green beans, right? A lot of us want step-by-step instructions on how to do these things. In a world of social media and sound bites and clickbait and BuzzFeed and Pinterest, we sometimes think everything can be boiled down to a few never-felt steps. Okay, parents, I have a little bit of bad news for you. That's not true. It's not possible. I wish it were true, but it's not. There are no safe, I don't know. There's no fail-safe plans. I mean, there's a wish for that, but it doesn't actually exist in the real world. So we need to start changing our mind, the way we think about parenting 100%. And what I mean is that we've got to be able to see the big picture. So if we're building a house, right? I don't know anything about building houses, but if we're building a house, we would need first a design plan, right? A blueprint. And then we need a foundation. And then we need a frame, and then we began to fill in that frame. So let's start with a blueprint. So this is what I'm talking about, big picture in parenting. And so if we're going to talk about intentional parenting, which is what this podcast is all about, we've got to think intentionally about all of these things. The question isn't really, how do I get my teenager to get out of bed in the mornings and get out the door without drama? The question, it's completely different than that. The actual thing that we need to shoot for is the big picture. We can't start off in these small ways. So let's start with a blueprint. Think of a blueprint as your family's goals, plans, future. What kind of children are you trying to raise? Foundation is next. And for me, it's the Bible. It's the Bible, the ideas and truths found in its pages. My faith literally informs my entire worldview. That's my foundation. And so my blueprint is my plan or my goals. And then my foundation for my house is my faith. And think of the frame as the framework. That's pretty easy to remember, right? How your family functions, expectations for you, expectations for your children, the practical stuff. We'll be talking about all 3 during this podcast series. But probably what I'm going to try to focus on a lot more is the framework, because I think that's what's missing. I think there's a lot of podcasts out there right now that teach about how we need to have, how we need to raise our families and what kind of children we need to raise. And they're kind of like, they're good, but sometimes they lack practical step-by-step and counsel and advice. And so sometimes it can seem a little bit out of reach for us as we listen. So for now, let me ask you this question. What kind of children are you trying to raise? What's your end game? I want you to take a moment and think about it. I'll even pause right now. What is your end game? What kind of children are you trying to raise? Just stop and think about that. When you look at your son and you look at your daughter, what are your hopes for their future? And what do you see in 20 years from now, and 10 years from now, and 15 years from now, and even in 30 years from now? What do you see? Do you see an MLB player? Maybe a top engineer for NASA? A brain surgeon? Do you see a kind, compassionate adult? Do you see, is happiness your greatest goal in helping your children be raised? That they should be happy? Should they be successful financially? Is that your biggest goal? What kind of children are you trying to raise? What's your end game? Do you want to raise someone who makes a big impact in the world, or connected to family, educated, well settled in life, as we say in Asia? So what is your end game first? And so for all of us, that looks differently. But let's get gut-wrenchingly honest and tell me what you don't need to tell me, but I guess you can share in your right now in your own heart, like, what's your end game in raising your children? So intentional parenting is the heart behind this entire podcast. We need a blueprint, we need a foundation, and we need a framework. So what character traits do you want your children to carry as they grow? What kind of people will they be? What kind of people do you want them to be? My first advice to you is to process that as parents. So sit with your husband, sit with your wives, sit down together as parents, and just even write it down. It's the first great step to intentional parenting. What is your heart and goal for your children as you raise them? And once you write that down, we can go anywhere. We can start with, the foundation's there, that's the blueprint, and then we can get to the practical stuff, the intentional parenting, the framework. So let me give you an example. If you're raising your kids, I'm raising my son to become a successful player in Major League Baseball. By all means, everything should revolve around his baseball schedule. Everything. Your family time, your meal time, your church attendance. Baseball should come first every single time. In fact, he needs a lot of practice. He needs to be on the best traveling team. He needs to have individual coaching as much as possible. And your family needs to live and breathe baseball to get him there, because that's your goal. Okay? Well, I'm guessing most of you didn't say that, right? Now think about it. How are you raising your children right now? Some of us are raising our children as if they're going to become Major League Baseball players, but our actual blueprint, our actual goal is that they would become godly, loving, compassionate, connected to family, healthy, young men and women. But sometimes we don't live it out by the way that we raise them, if that makes sense. If you're raising your daughter to become a compassionate, strong, kind leader who loves Jesus and connected to family, you need to make decisions to go along with that. And so think about how you're raising your children and think about your blueprint. What's your goals? If your goal is to raise your children, if your goal is your child to become a certain way, then it's super important that you raise them and it matches that goal, right? And so I have people that I know who are raising their children. They want them to love Jesus, and they want them to be connected, and they want them to know God, and to be connected to family, and to be healthy and strong, and have good self-confidence and all of these things. And but the way they're raising them doesn't really match their words. And I don't think it's anything horrible. I just think it's lack of intentionality. And so that's kind of what this podcast will hopefully, help us get a little bit better at. So many of us say we want those kind of children, healthy children and love family and love Jesus and make a difference in the world. But the way we raise them doesn't always reflect that. And so people are able to voice their blueprint pretty well. And so most of my clients that I work with are able to express their foundation too. Their faith, the role of faith in their family life. And so as you take a few minutes to do that, I think it'll be really helpful. But the problem that I think that most families run into in my experience is the framework. How do we achieve these goals? We need practical help navigating this. This is where I hope Mom of Many can help you. We've got enough parenting podcasts out there focusing on ideals and values and what kind of parents do we want to be and what kind of children we hope to raise, but we lack a lot of practical ways to make this actually happen, to make this a reality. And so I hope that this podcast will help. So carrying on with this analogy of building a house with clear blueprints and goals, a strong foundation, and a sturdy framework. When parents ask me how to get their children to listen, to obey, to show respect, to not throw tantrums over dinner, or to stay in bed, it's like asking me, Tammy, how do we get these lights installed in our house? Or where do we put our sofa? Or where should I hang this picture? When the framework of the house hasn't even been built yet or fortified. And so let's first get the framework up, and then we can talk about the other stuff, right? So that's kind of my heart behind this podcast. Just remember to look at the big picture. So like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you back here next week. In an effort to be fully transparent, I'm going to share with you some parent fails every now and then. In the home that we raised, we had 46 children that I've told you about. We had probably been raising children for about 3 or 4 years, and it never occurred to me. I'm really embarrassed to say this actually now. I'm second guessing myself whether I should tell you or not. So please don't judge me, because I'm not judging you. And we had probably been going on for about 4 years, and it occurred to me somehow that, I don't know, somebody told me, I don't know how, that we should probably get our kids' eyes checked. And so we took our children into the eye doctor batch by batch over a period of a week. And I would go in and sit with them at the optometrist, and we would have each of the kids take an eye test. And one of my boys, God bless him, he's always making jokes. He's always making everybody laugh, and he's always just full of, spice. And so we were there, and I was sitting right next to him, and the doctor's checking his eyes, and he says, cover the side. He reads the letters A, F, G, X, Y, and then he covers his other eye, and then the doctor says, read the letters. And then he said, well, I can't. I'm blind in this eye. And so I kicked him under the table. I was like, stop. Be serious. Like, we're at a doctor. And the doctor said, what? And he goes, yeah, I'm completely blind in that eye. And I said, you're not blind. You're not blind. Stop, telling fibs, to the doctor. Be serious. Because he's always joking. And then he said, no, I'm really blind. He was probably about 8 years old at the time, 8 or 9 years old. And the doctor, sure enough, tested him, and he is blind in his left eye. He's completely blind. And I'm just sitting there mortified, embarrassed, and just like, I don't know, I was just so upset with myself for not catching that and not being able to catch it in time and not doing anything about it. This poor kid has been walking around for 4 years, not being able to see out of his left eye. And so we got home, and we got back in the car, and I said, why didn't you tell me that you were blind in your left eye, like all these years? Like, this is our very first son. Actually, he was the first one that came to our family. And I said, you've been here from day one, and you've never told me you were blind in your left eye. Come to think about it, I always did recognize that he never could quite catch a ball. It was like always hit him in the face, and I just thought he was clumsy. I didn't know he was blind. I didn't know he was blind. He was blind. And so he says, well, I said, why didn't you tell me? Like, why didn't you tell me? You could have told me. I would have helped you. And he said, well, I didn't think it mattered, and you never asked me. I said, oh my gosh. He goes, anyway, it's not a problem. I can see fine out of this side. It's 100%. So I thought, well, I've got one eye. What do I need to complain about? So Parent Fell, brought to you by Tammy Ma.